The blood on Willa Zimmerman's handkerchief had been there for 3 days before the fever started, but she had hidden it from her father and younger brother, tucking the stained cloth deep in her trunk beneath the cotton dresses she wore to church. Now, as she lay in the narrow bed in the room above her father's general store in Delta, Colorado, the fever consumed her like wildfire spreading across dry prairie grass, and she could no longer hide anything at all. Benjamin Everett had been passing through Delta on his way to Wyoming when he stopped for supplies and overheard Thomas Zimmerman pleading with Doc Henderson in the street. The old doctor was shaking his head, his leather bag hanging heavy in his weathered hand. "I have 4 other cases just as bad, Thomas. This influenza is sweeping through half the county. I cannot sit with every patient day and night. You will have to manage her care yourself. Cool cloths, water when she will take it, and pray the fever breaks before it takes her mind." Benjamin watched the shopkeeper's shoulders sag, watched him press his palm against his eyes. Thomas Zimmerman was a thin man, worn down by mountain winters, and the endless work of keeping a business alive in a town that served more as a waypoint than a destination. His son, barely 14, stood beside him with fear written plainly across his young face. "I have to mind the store," Thomas said, and his voice cracked. "If I close it, we lose everything. But Samuel here does not know how to care for his sister properly, and I cannot expect him to shoulder this alone." Benjamin did not know what made him step forward. He had been drifting since Appomattox, 20 years of wandering from one cattle drive to another, one ranch to the next, never settling anywhere long enough to call it home. At 38 years old, he had convinced himself he preferred it that way, that the loneliness was a choice rather than a sentence. But something in Thomas Zimmerman's desperate face called to a part of Benjamin he thought had died in the war. "I can help," Benjamin heard himself say. Thomas turned, taking in Benjamin's dusty clothes, the Colt revolver on his hip, the hard planes of a face that had seen too much sun and too much sorrow. "You are a stranger." "I am," Benjamin agreed, "but I have nursed men through fevers before. Field hospitals taught me what I know, and it kept more alive than dead. I do not ask for payment, just a place to sleep and meals while I am here." Thomas studied him for a long moment, and Benjamin could see the calculation happening behind the man's eyes. Trust a stranger with his daughter, or watch her die while he tallied accounts and sold flour to miners. It was not really a choice at all. "Her name is Willa," Thomas said finally. "She is 19 years old, and she is the best thing in my life besides my boy. If you can help her, I will be in your debt." Benjamin nodded and followed Thomas into the store and up the narrow stairs to the living quarters above. The room where Willa lay was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture that spoke of careful living. The young woman in the bed was barely visible beneath the quilts piled on top of her, but even from the doorway Benjamin could hear the ragged sound of her breathing. He approached slowly, the way he might approach a skittish horse, and when he reached the bedside he finally saw her face. Fever had flushed her cheeks bright red, a stark contrast to the pallor of her forehead and chin. Her hair, dark as coffee, lay plastered to her skin with sweat. She was mumbling something he could not make out, her eyes moving rapidly beneath closed lids. "How long has she been like this?" Benjamin asked. "The fever started 7 days ago," Thomas said. "At first it was mild. We thought she just had a cold, but it has gotten worse each day. Last night she stopped making sense when she talked. 7 days." Benjamin had seen men die from fever in half that time, and he had seen others linger for weeks before finally succumbing. There was no way to know which way this would go, but he had told Thomas Zimmerman he could help, and Benjamin Everett did not go back on his word. "I will need clean cloths," cool water from the well, a basin, and more if the well water is not cold enough. If you have any willow bark tea, that would help. And someone will need to bring meals for both of us, because I will not be leaving this room until the fever breaks." Thomas gripped Benjamin's shoulder with surprising strength. "Thank you," he said, and there were tears in his eyes. "Samuel will bring you whatever you need." Then Thomas was gone, back down the stairs to the store where customers were already calling for service, and Benjamin was alone with Willa Zimmerman, and the sound of her labored breathing. He removed his hat and gun belt, hanging them on the peg by the door, then rolled up his sleeves and set to work. Young Samuel brought up a basin of well water so cold it made Benjamin's fingers ache, and he soaked one of the clean cloths and began to wipe Willa's face and neck with gentle strokes. She flinched at the first touch of cold water, crying out something that might have been a name, but then she settled again into restless sleep. Benjamin worked methodically, the way he had learned during the war when efficiency meant the difference between saving a life and watching it slip away. He cooled her face, her neck, her arms. When the cloth grew warm from her skin, he dipped it again and continued. Every hour, Samuel brought fresh water. Every few hours, Benjamin tried to get Willa to drink, supporting her head while he trickled water between her lips. Most of it ran down her chin, but some of it went down her throat, and that had to be enough. Night fell, and Thomas brought up a plate of beans and cornbread that Benjamin ate with one hand while keeping the other on Willa's wrist, monitoring her pulse. It was too fast, racing like a runaway horse, but it was strong. That was something. "You should rest," Thomas said. "I can sit with her for a few hours." "You need to sleep so you can work tomorrow," Benjamin replied. "I will manage," and he did. Through that first long night, Benjamin Everett sat beside Willa Zimmerman's bed and fought the fever that was trying to take her. He had fought in a war, had survived battles where men fell like wheat before a scythe, but this was different. This was quiet and intimate, and somehow more frightening than any charge he had ever made. One life, one young woman who meant nothing to him but everything to the people in this house, and all he could do was bathe her forehead and wait. In the darkest hours before dawn, Willa's eyes opened. They were unfocused, the pupils blown wide, and Benjamin knew she was not truly seeing him, but her lips moved and he leaned close to hear. "I do not want to die," she whispered. "You are not going to die," Benjamin said, and he tried to make his voice firm and certain even though he felt neither. "The fever will break. You just have to hold on." "Cold," she said. "So cold." He knew it was the fever lying to her, making her feel chilled even as her body burned, but he pulled the quilts higher around her shoulders anyway. Her hand emerged from beneath the covers, reaching for something, and without thinking Benjamin took it in his own. Her fingers were like brands against his palm, but he held on. "I am right here," he said. "You are not alone." She seemed to calm at that, her hand relaxing in his grip, and soon she had drifted back into fever dreams. Benjamin did not let go. He sat there with her hand in his, watching the window brighten with the approach of dawn, and wondered what it was about this particular stranger that made him want so desperately to see her live. The 8th day was worse than the 7th. Willa barely woke at all, and when Benjamin managed to rouse her enough to drink, she could not seem to swallow properly. Water dribbled from her mouth, and he had to be careful not to choke her. Her breathing grew more labored, each inhale a visible effort, and her fever climbed even higher. Benjamin stripped away all the quilts except one thin sheet and bathed her continuously with the coldest water Samuel could bring. Thomas came up twice that day, standing in the doorway as though afraid to come closer. "Is she going to make it?" he asked the second time. Benjamin wanted to tell him yes, wanted to offer reassurance and certainty, but he had learned long ago that false hope was crueler than hard truth. I do not know, he said, but I am not giving up on her. Thomas nodded and left, and Benjamin heard his footsteps heavy on the stairs. By the 9th day, Benjamin had been awake for over 60 hours. His eyes felt full of sand, and his hands shook slightly when he wrung out the cloths, but he did not stop. He could not stop. Somewhere in the long hours of sitting beside her, watching her fight for each breath, Willa Zimmerman had stopped being a stranger to him. He knew the exact pattern of freckles across her nose. He knew that she talked in her fever dreams about a horse named Rosie and a friend named Charlotte who had moved to California. He knew that she sang snatches of hymns when the fever was at its worst, and that sometimes she cried without waking. He knew her, and the thought of watching her die had become unbearable. On the afternoon of the 9th day, Doc Henderson came by to check on his patient. He examined Willa while Benjamin stood against the wall, giving the doctor room to work. Henderson listened to her lungs, felt her forehead, checked her pulse. When he was done, he turned to Benjamin with tired eyes. "You have done good work here," the doctor said. "I have lost 3 patients to this influenza already. One of them was younger than Miss Zimmerman and seemed healthier before it struck. The fact that she is still alive speaks to your care." "But will she make it?" Benjamin asked. Henderson sighed. "If the fever does not break soon, her body will give out. Another day or 2 at most before we know one way or the other. Keep doing what you are doing. It is all anyone can do." After the doctor left, Benjamin sat back down beside Willa's bed and took up the cloth again. His back ached from sitting in the hard chair for so long, and his head pounded from lack of sleep, but none of that mattered. Nothing mattered except the rise and fall of Willa's chest and the heat radiating from her skin. "You have to fight," he told her, even though she could not hear him. "Your father needs you. Your brother needs you. This town is too small and too harsh for them to lose you." He paused, the wet cloth dripping in his hand. "I need you," he added quietly, "though I have no right to say it." Night fell again, the 10th night since Willa's fever had begun. Benjamin lit the lamp on the bedside table, trimming the wick low so the light would not disturb her. Outside, he could hear the sounds of Delta settling down for the evening. Horses being stabled, the saloon piano starting up, the creak of wagon wheels on the dusty Main Street. It was the summer of 1885, and the Wild West was slowly being tamed by railroads and telegraph lines. But here in this small room, the ancient battle between life and death played out the way it always had. Benjamin dozed in his chair sometime after midnight, his head dropping forward onto his chest, but he jerked awake almost immediately. Something had changed. He could not say what exactly, but the quality of the air in the room felt different. He reached out to check Willa's forehead, and his heart nearly stopped. She was cooler. Not cool, not yet, but definitely cooler than she had been an hour ago. Benjamin pressed his palm more firmly against her skin, afraid he was imagining it, but no, her fever was dropping. He checked her pulse and found it slower, steadier. Her breathing had eased, the terrible ragged quality gone. "Willa," he said, and his voice came out rough with emotion. "Willa, can you hear me?" Her eyes flickered open, and for the first time in days they were clear. She looked at him without recognition, her brow furrowing slightly, but she was seeing him. Really seeing him. "Water," she whispered. Benjamin nearly laughed with relief. He poured water from the pitcher into a cup and helped her drink, supporting her head while she took small sips. She drank more than she had in days, 3 full swallows before she turned her head away. "Where am I?" she asked. "Your room, above your father's store. You have been very sick." She blinked slowly, trying to process this. "Who are you?" "My name is Benjamin Everett." "Your father asked me to help nurse you through the fever." "How long?" 10 days. Her eyes widened slightly. 10 days. I do not remember any of it. "That is probably for the best," Benjamin said. "You need to rest now. Your fever has broken, but you are still weak." "You stayed with me the whole time?" she asked, and there was something in her voice he could not quite identify. "I did." Why? It was a fair question, and Benjamin did not have a good answer. Or rather, he had an answer, but it made no sense even to himself. How could he explain that the moment he saw her father's desperation, something in him had responded? That sitting beside her for 10 days had felt more like coming home than anything he had experienced in 20 years. "Because you needed help," he said finally, "and I could give it." Willa studied his face, her dark eyes moving over his features as though committing them to memory. Then she nodded, just a small dip of her chin, and closed her eyes again. Within minutes she was asleep, but this was real sleep, not the fever-tossed unconsciousness that had held her before. Her breathing was deep and even, and when Benjamin checked her forehead again, she was cooler still. The fever had broken. Benjamin stood and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. His legs were unsteady beneath him, and he realized he was shaking. Relief, exhaustion, and something else he did not want to name flooded through him all at once. He had done it. She was going to live. He should leave now, he thought. He had done what he promised. There was no reason to stay in Delta any longer. He could collect his horse from the livery, ride out tomorrow, and be back on the trail to Wyoming within a day. But even as he thought it, Benjamin knew he was not going anywhere. He slept for a few hours in the chair, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion, and woke to find sunlight streaming through the window, and Thomas Zimmerman standing in the doorway with tears on his face. "Her fever broke," Thomas said, and it was not a question. "Late last night," Benjamin confirmed. "She woke for a few minutes, drank some water. She will need time to recover her strength, but the worst is past." Thomas crossed the room and gripped Benjamin's hand, shaking it hard. "You saved my daughter's life." "I do not have words for what that means to me. I am just glad I could help." "You will stay," Thomas said, "for as long as you want. Room, board, and I will pay you wages besides. I could use help with the store, and you have more than earned it." Benjamin looked at Willa, still sleeping peacefully in her bed. He thought about riding away and never seeing her again, never knowing how her story turned out. The thought made something twist painfully in his chest. "I will stay for a while," he said. "Make sure she recovers fully." Thomas smiled. "Good. That is good." Over the next week, Benjamin watched Willa come back to life. It was a slow process, her strength returning in small increments. The first day she could sit up in bed. The second day she could stand with help. By the fourth day, she was insisting on walking around the room on her own, though Benjamin stayed close in case she stumbled. They talked during those long days of recovery. At first it was simple things: the weather, the store, how Samuel was doing with his schoolwork. But as Willa grew stronger, their conversations deepened. She told him about growing up in Delta, about how her mother had died when Samuel was born, and how she had helped raise him while also working in the store. She told him about the books she loved to read, ordered special from Denver, and about her dream of one day seeing the ocean. Benjamin found himself telling her things he had not spoken about in years, about the war and what it had taken from him, about the ranch in Tennessee where he had grown up, burned to the ground during Sherman's march, about the 2 decades of drifting that had followed, looking for something he could not name. "You never wanted to settle down?" Willa asked one afternoon. She was sitting in the chair by the window, a quilt across her lap, and the sunlight made her dark hair shine. "I thought about it," Benjamin admitted. He was sitting on the edge of her bed, which he had come to think of as his usual spot during their talks. "But everywhere I stopped felt wrong somehow, like I was wearing someone else's clothes. And now Now I am not so sure it was the places that were wrong." She looked at him with those intelligent dark eyes, and Benjamin had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see straight through him. "Maybe you are not ready to stop running." "Maybe," he agreed. "Are you ready now?" It was a bold question, made more so by the slight catch in her voice when she asked it. Benjamin met her gaze and held it. "I might be," he said. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Benjamin had not felt in so long he had almost forgotten what to call it. Want. Hope. The terrifying possibility of something real. Willa looked away first, a flush rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. "You should know," she said quietly, "that I remember some things from when I was sick, not much but pieces. I remember your voice. I remember you telling me I was not alone." "You were not," Benjamin said. "I remember holding someone's hand. Was that you?" "Yes." She turned back to him, and there were tears in her eyes. "I think that might be why I am still here, because you gave me something to hold on to." Benjamin stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were at eye level. He took her hand, the same way he had held it through those long fever nights, and this time she squeezed back. "Willa," he said, and her name felt right in his mouth, like a word he had been waiting his whole life to say. "I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But I need to tell you that these past weeks, sitting with you, talking with you, it has meant more to me than anything has in 20 years. "Benjamin," she whispered, "I am not good with pretty words. I am just a cowboy who has seen too much and stayed in one place too little. But if you would let me, I would like to stay here, get to know you properly, see if what I think I feel is real." A tear slipped down her cheek and she smiled. "What do you think you feel?" He reached up and wiped the tear away with his thumb. "Like I finally stopped running." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, her hand still holding his tight. "Then stay," she said. "Stay and let us find out together." Benjamin kissed her then, soft and careful, afraid she might still be too fragile. But Willa kissed him back with surprising strength, her free hand coming up to cup his cheek, and Benjamin felt something in his chest crack open. All the walls he had built, all the defenses he had erected to keep himself safe from caring too much, they crumbled like dry earth. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. "I am staying," Benjamin said, "for as long as you will have me." "Good," Willa said, and she was smiling through her tears, "because I do not plan on letting you go." Thomas Zimmerman was delighted when Benjamin officially asked permission to court his daughter. "I was hoping you would," he admitted. "I have watched the way you two look at each other. Reminds me of how her mother and I were." Samuel was less enthused at first, protective of his sister in the way teenage boys often were. But Benjamin won him over by teaching him to shoot and taking him fishing in the Gunnison River on Sundays. Eventually, Samuel admitted that having Benjamin around was not so bad, which Benjamin took as high praise from a 14-year-old. Delta in the summer of 1885 was a town on the verge of growth. The railroad was coming through, bringing with it the promise of easier transport and new commerce. Thomas's general store stood to benefit greatly, and he offered Benjamin a partnership in the business. Benjamin accepted, using the money he had saved from years of ranch work to buy a stake in the store and a small house on the edge of town where he and Willa could live once they were married. The courtship was proper but passionate. They took walks along the river in the evenings, always with Samuel trailing behind as a chaperone. They attended church socials and barn dances, and Benjamin discovered that Willa loved to dance, despite her claims that she was terrible at it. They read books together, sitting on the porch of the Zimmerman house while the sun set over the western mountains, and argued cheerfully about which authors were worth the paper they were printed on, and they talked. Lord, how they talked! Benjamin told her everything about the battles he had fought and the friends he had lost, about the guilt he carried for surviving when so many had not. Willa listened without judgment, her hand in his, and when he was done, she told him about the loneliness of growing up without a mother, about the weight of responsibility she had carried for Samuel, about the fear that she would never find someone who saw her as more than just a shopkeeper's daughter. "I see you," Benjamin told her one evening as they sat by the river. "I see how smart you are, how strong. I see the way you care for your family and this town. I see all of it, and I love all of it." Willa leaned against his shoulder, her head fitting perfectly in the hollow there. "I love you too," she said. "I think I started loving you when you told me I was not going to die. You sounded so certain, even though we both know you could not have been. That kind of certainty, that refusal to give up it, is exactly who you are." "I could not lose you," Benjamin said. "Even then, when I had no right to care, I could not stand the thought of losing you." They were married in September, just 3 months after Willa's fever had broken. Doc Henderson gave her away since Thomas needed to stand with Samuel, and half the town showed up to watch. Willa wore a dress she had sewn herself from white cotton, with lace at the collar that had belonged to her mother. Benjamin wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed, and when he saw her walking toward him down the aisle of the little church, he thought his heart might burst from his chest. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Benjamin barely heard the rest of the ceremony. He was too focused on Willa's face, on the tears of joy in her eyes, on the way her hand trembled in his when they exchanged vows. "I, Benjamin Everett, take you, Willa Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part." The words echoed the vow he had already made to himself during those long nights beside her sick, and when Willa repeated them back to him, he knew she meant them just as deeply. They kissed to cheers from the congregation, and then they were outside in the golden September sunlight, rice falling around them like snow, laughing and holding each other close. The house Benjamin had bought was small but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms and a parlor and a kitchen that looked out over a little garden plot. Willa declared it perfect and immediately set about making it a home. She hung curtains in the windows and braided a rug for the floor. Benjamin built her bookshelves and a writing desk where she could keep the accounts for the store. Together, they planted vegetables in the garden and talked about the future. "I want children," Willa said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the stars come out. "At least 2, maybe 3. I want them to grow up knowing they are loved and safe." "I want that too," Benjamin said. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "I want to give you everything you have ever dreamed of." "You already have," Willa said. "Everything else is just extra." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The store demanded long hours, and there were times when Benjamin stumbled home exhausted, barely able to eat supper before falling into bed. Willa worked just as hard, managing the household and keeping the books and still finding time to help in the store when they were short-handed. But they were happy. Deliriously, impossibly happy. They had found in each other something neither had expected: a partnership built on mutual respect and affection, and a deep, abiding love that seemed to grow stronger every day. In the spring of 1886, Willa told Benjamin she was pregnant. She said it over breakfast, casual as asking him to pass the salt, and Benjamin dropped his fork. "You are certain?" he asked. "As certain as I can be without Doc Henderson confirming it. But yes, I am certain." Benjamin stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she laughed and told him he was going to squash the baby. He loosened his grip but did not let go. "We are going to have a child," he said, wonderstruck. "You and I, we are," Willa agreed. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Benjamin said. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. "You have given me everything, Willa. A home, a purpose, a reason to stop running, and now a child. I do not deserve any of it, but I swear I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it." "You already are," Willa said. "You are the best man I know, Benjamin Everett. Our child is lucky to have you as a father." The pregnancy was difficult. Willa was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down, and Benjamin worried constantly that she was not getting enough nourishment. He made her broths and teas and anything else he could think of that might tempt her appetite. Slowly, she improved, and by her second trimester she was feeling well enough to return to work at the store part-time. But Benjamin never forgot those feverish 10 days when he had nearly lost her, and he watched her like a hawk for any sign of illness. Doc Henderson finally took him aside and told him to calm down. "Your wife is strong and healthy," the doctor said. "She survived the worst influenza I have seen in years. A pregnancy is not going to kill her. You need to trust her body to know what to do." Benjamin tried to take the advice to heart, but it was hard. Every time Willa so much as winced, he was at her side asking what was wrong. She bore his hovering with good humor, teasing him about being an overprotective hen, but he could see she was touched by his concern too. In December of 1886, on a cold night when snow was falling soft outside their windows, Willa went into labor. Benjamin fetched Doc Henderson and then paced the floor of their parlor while the doctor and Mrs. Chen, the midwife, attended to his wife in the bedroom. He could hear Willa crying out, and each sound felt like a knife to his heart. Samuel sat with him, now 15 and nearly as tall as Benjamin. "She is going to be fine," the boy said, trying to sound confident. "Willa is the toughest person I know." "I know," Benjamin said. But that does not make listening to her in pain any easier. It was dawn before Doc Henderson emerged from the bedroom, his sleeves rolled up and a tired smile on his face. "You have a son," he said. "Both mother and baby are doing well." Benjamin did not remember crossing the room, but suddenly he was in the bedroom doorway staring at his wife. Willa was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but smiling, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. Benjamin approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and when he looked down at his son's face he felt tears start to fall. "He is perfect," Willa said. "Look at him, Benjamin. He has your nose." "He has your eyes," Benjamin replied. The baby was staring up at him with dark, serious eyes, and Benjamin reached out to touch one impossibly small hand. Tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, and Benjamin made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "What should we name him?" Willa asked. They had discussed names for months but had never settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, Benjamin knew exactly what he wanted to call him. "Thomas," he said, "after your father. He gave me a chance when I was just a stranger passing through. He trusted me with you. I want to honor that." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas Everett," she said, testing the name. "I think it is perfect. My father is going to cry when he hears." "I am already crying," Thomas Zimmerman said from the doorway. They had not heard him come up the stairs, but there he stood with Samuel beside him, both of them grinning. "May we come in and meet my grandson?" The next few years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Baby Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's dark hair and his father's quiet determination. The store prospered as Delta continued to grow, and Benjamin and Thomas Zimmerman expanded the business, adding a second building to store more inventory and hiring 2 clerks to help manage the increased trade. Willa proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving but firm when necessary. She sang to Thomas at night, the same hymns she had sung in her fever dreams, and Benjamin would stand in the doorway listening, his heart so full it ached. In 1889, their second child was born, a daughter they named Charlotte after Willa's childhood friend. She was a tiny thing, smaller than Thomas had been, but she had a powerful set of lungs and a stubborn streak that made her parents laugh even as it exhausted them. "She is going to be trouble," Willa predicted, rocking the baby while Thomas played at her feet with wooden blocks. "She gets that from you," Benjamin said, leaning down to kiss his wife's cheek. "I was never trouble," Willa protested. "You gave me heart failure by getting sick before I even knew you. I would call that trouble." Willa laughed and swatted at him playfully. "That was not my fault. Besides, look how well it turned out. If I had not gotten sick, you would have ridden right through Delta and we never would have met." "I do not even want to think about that," Benjamin said seriously. "A life without you in it is not a life I want to imagine." As the children grew, Benjamin taught them the things his own father had taught him. Thomas learned to ride before he was 5, sitting proud in the saddle on a gentle mare Benjamin bought specifically for him. Charlotte was fearless, climbing everything she could reach and keeping her parents in a constant state of near panic. But they were good children, kind and curious, and Benjamin felt blessed every single day. The store continued to thrive into the 1890s. Delta had grown from a small waypoint into a proper town, with a school and a church and even a small theater where traveling performers would sometimes stop. The railroad brought prosperity, and Benjamin and Thomas Zimmerman became respected businessmen in the community. But for all the success, Benjamin's favorite moments were still the quiet ones at home. Evenings on the porch with Willa, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Sunday mornings at church, his family beside him in the pew. Nights in bed with his wife in his arms, talking about their day and making plans for tomorrow. "You ever regret it?" Willa asked him one night in the spring of 1892. They had been married for nearly 7 years, and she was as beautiful to him as the day he first saw her fighting for her life in that narrow bed above the store. "Regret what?" Benjamin asked. "Staying. Giving up your wandering life to settle down here with me." Benjamin propped himself up on one elbow so he could look at her properly. "I have never regretted it for a single second. Not one. This life, with you and our children, is more than I ever dreamed I could have. You saved me, Willa, just as much as I helped save you that summer." "We saved each other," Willa said. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw with her fingers. "I think we were meant to find each other, even if it took a terrible fever to make it happen. I would fight that fever 1,000 times over if it meant ending up here with you." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the kind of deep intimacy that came from truly knowing another person. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Benjamin thought about the path that had brought him here. All the years of drifting, all the loneliness and searching it had been leading him to this moment, to this woman, to this life. In the fall of 1893, Thomas Zimmerman passed away peacefully in his sleep. He had been slowing down for a while, his heart not as strong as it once was, but his death still hit the family hard. Benjamin and Willa took over full ownership of the store, and Samuel, now a young man of 22, became a full partner in the business. At the funeral, Benjamin stood with his arm around Willa while she cried against his shoulder. "He was so proud of you," she whispered. "He told me before he died that letting you stay to care for me was the best decision he ever made." "He gave me everything," Benjamin said, his own voice thick with tears. "A place to belong, a family, you. I owe him more than I could ever repay." "You repaid him every day," Willa said. "By loving me, by giving him grandchildren, by being the son he never had. He knew that." Young Thomas, now 6 years old, stood solemn in his Sunday suit, holding his 4-year-old sister's hand. He looked up at his father with confused, sad eyes. "Is Grandpa really gone?" Benjamin knelt down and pulled both his children into a hug. "Yes," he said gently. "But he is not really gone as long as we remember him. He lives on in you, in your name, in the stories we tell about him, and he loved you both very much." Charlotte sniffled and buried her face in Benjamin's neck. "I am going to miss him." "Me too, sweetheart, me too." The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and challenges. The store expanded again, and by 1895 it was the largest general store in the region, serving not just Delta but the surrounding ranches and mining camps as well. Benjamin and Samuel worked well together, and Samuel eventually married a school teacher named Mary who fit into the family perfectly. Willa continued to be the heart of their home and business. She managed the accounts with precision, helped customers with a warm smile, and still found time to be an attentive mother and loving wife. She had grown even more beautiful with age, Benjamin thought, her face marked with laugh lines and the character that came from a life well lived. In 1897, their third child was born, another son they named after Samuel. Willa was 31 now, and the pregnancy had been harder than the previous two, but she came through it well. Baby Samuel was a quiet child, content to watch the world with thoughtful eyes, and he seemed to adore his older siblings. "I think this is our last one," Willa said as she nursed the baby one evening. "My body is telling me it is time to be done having children." "Whatever you want," Benjamin said. 3 is a blessing, more than I ever expected to have." "They are good children," Willa said. "We have been lucky, not lucky, blessed. There is a difference." As the century drew to a close, Benjamin found himself reflecting more and more on the path his life had taken. He was 48 years old now, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from squinting at too many sunrises. But he was happy in a way he had never imagined possible. Delta had changed dramatically since he first rode in that summer day in 1885. It was a proper town now, with electric lights on Main Street and talk of bringing in telephone lines. The Wild West was fading, replaced by civilization and progress, but Benjamin did not mourn it. He had found something better than freedom and adventure. He had found home. On a warm evening in June of 1900, Benjamin and Willa sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 13 now, tall and serious and already talking about joining the business when he finished school. Charlotte was 11, all wild curls and scraped knees and fierce opinions about everything. Little Samuel was 3, toddling after his siblings and demanding to be included in their games. "Can you believe it has been 15 years?" Willa said. She was leaning against Benjamin, her head on his shoulder, and he had his arm wrapped around her waist. "Since what?" "Since my fever. Since you stayed awake for 10 days to make sure I survived. Since our whole life together began." Benjamin pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best 15 years of my life. Mine too." Willa was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had ridden through Delta that day instead of stopping?" "I try not to," Benjamin said honestly. "The thought of never meeting you, never having this life, it makes me feel sick. I think I would have kept drifting until I died, probably alone, definitely unfulfilled." "I probably would have died," Willa said matter-of-factly. "Doc Henderson was stretched too thin. My father would not have known how to care for me properly. The fever would have taken me." "Do not say that." Benjamin tightened his arm around her. "It is true, though. You saved my life, Benjamin, and in doing so you gave me this beautiful life we have built together. I will never stop being grateful for that." "You saved me right back," Benjamin said. "In every way that matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky orange and pink as it set behind the mountains. The children's laughter rang out across the yard, and somewhere nearby a mockingbird was singing its evening song. "I love you," Willa said. "More than I did yesterday, more than I did last year, more than I did when we first met. My love for you just keeps growing." "I love you too," Benjamin replied, "until my last breath and beyond it." Thomas Zimmerman Everett ran up to the porch then, out of breath and grinning. "Papa, can we go fishing tomorrow, please? You promised we could go soon." "Did I now?" Benjamin pretended to think about it, enjoying the anxious look on his son's face. "You did. Last week you said we would go fishing soon, and it has been a whole week." "Well, I suppose if I promised, then we had better go. Would not want to disappoint my son." Thomas whooped with joy and ran back to tell his siblings. Charlotte immediately insisted she was coming too, and little Samuel declared he wanted to catch the biggest fish in the whole river. "You have created monsters," Willa said, but she was smiling. "Our monsters," Benjamin said. "The very best kind." That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Benjamin and Willa lay in bed talking the way they always did before sleep claimed them. It was their favorite time of day, these quiet moments when it was just the two of them and the rest of the world faded away. "I have been thinking," Willa said, "about expanding the store again. There is a vacant lot next to our current buildings. We could buy it and build something bigger, bring in more stock, maybe even start ordering some of those fancy goods from back east that people are always asking about." "You want to keep growing the business?" Benjamin asked. "I want to keep building something for our children. Thomas is already interested in taking over someday. Maybe Charlotte will be too, or Samuel. I want to leave them something solid, something that will support their families the way it has supported ours." "Then we will do it," Benjamin said. "We will buy the lot and build the biggest, best general store in western Colorado, the Zimmerman Everett Mercantile Company." "I like the sound of that," Willa said. She rolled over to face him, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. "You know what else I like? You." "I like you very much, Benjamin Everett. Just like, not love. Oh, I love you too, but liking someone is just as important, do not you think? I like spending time with you, I like talking to you, I like building this life with you. Love is the foundation, but like is what makes the day-to-day worthwhile." "I like you too," Benjamin said seriously. "I like everything about you, Willa, I always have." She kissed him then, deep and sweet, and Benjamin responded with all the passion that 15 years of marriage had not diminished. Making love to his wife never got old. It was always new, always exciting, always exactly what he needed. Later, as Willa slept curled against his side, Benjamin lay awake and thought about that summer day 15 years ago when he had stopped in Delta for supplies. He thought about hearing Thomas Zimmerman's desperation and making the split-second decision to help. He thought about those 10 days of fighting death for a woman he did not know, staying awake through sheer will, because the alternative was unacceptable. If someone had told him then that he would marry that sick young woman, that they would build a life and a family together, that he would finally find the home he had been searching for, he would not have believed them. It would have seemed too much like a fairy tale, too good to be true. But here he was, living that fairy tale every single day, and he would never take it for granted. Not for one moment. The fishing trip the next day was everything young Thomas had hoped for. They caught a dozen trout between them, with Charlotte proving to be surprisingly adept with a fishing rod and little Samuel mostly just playing in the shallow water near the bank. Benjamin taught them how to clean the fish, and that evening Willa fried them up with cornmeal and potatoes. "Best meal I have ever had," Thomas declared, and Charlotte nodded enthusiastically even though her mouth was too full to speak. That is because you caught it yourself, Benjamin said. Food always tastes better when you worked for it. Can we go again next week? Charlotte asked. We will see. I have a lot of work to do at the store, but maybe. You work too much, Charlotte said with the blunt honesty of an 11-year-old. Mama says you need to rest more. Your mama is very wise, Benjamin said, catching Willa's eye across the table. She was trying not to laugh. She is the wisest person I know, Thomas agreed. Papa is the strongest and Mama is the wisest. What am I? Samuel asked, not wanting to be left out. You are the cutest, Charlotte said, reaching over to ruffle his hair. Samuel scowled and pushed her hand away, which only made her laugh. Benjamin watched his family banter back and forth, teasing and laughing, and felt that familiar rush of gratitude and love. This was everything. This right here was what made life worth living. The expansion of the store began in the fall of 1900 and was completed by the spring of 1901. The new building was impressive, with high ceilings and large windows and enough shelf space to stock everything from farming equipment to fine china. They held a grand opening in April, and half the county showed up to see the new Zimmerman Everett Mercantile Company. Business boomed. The new century brought new prosperity to Colorado, and Benjamin and Willa's store was perfectly positioned to take advantage of it. They hired more staff, including Samuel Zimmerman as the general manager, and the business ran like a well-oiled machine. But success came with its own challenges. The longer hours meant less time at home, and Benjamin found himself missing the simple days when it had just been him and Willa working together in her father's small store. He missed the quiet moments, the sense that they were building something together rather than just managing something that had grown beyond them. One evening in the summer of 1902, after a particularly long day at the store, Benjamin came home to find Willa sitting on the porch in the gathering dusk. She was not doing anything, just sitting and staring out at the mountains, and there was something in her posture that made Benjamin's heart clench. Are you all right? He asked, sitting down beside her. Just tired, Willa said. It has been a long day. It has been a long year, Benjamin said. Too long. I feel like we barely see each other anymore between the store and the children and everything else. I have been feeling the same way, Willa admitted. I miss you, Benjamin. I miss us. Remember when we used to take walks by the river every evening? When did we stop doing that? I do not know. Somewhere along the way we got too busy. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Benjamin made a decision. We are going to make a change, he said. Samuel can handle more responsibility at the store. We are going to start taking Sundays off completely, no matter what. And we are going to take a walk every evening, just like we used to. The work will still be there tomorrow, but we only get one life together. I do not want to waste it being too busy. Willa turned to look at him, and there were tears in her eyes. You mean that? I absolutely mean that. You are the most important thing in my life, Willa. More important than the store, more important than anything. I need to do better about showing you that. She leaned against him, and Benjamin wrapped his arms around her. I love you, she whispered. So very much. I love you too. Always and forever. They implemented the changes immediately, and the difference was dramatic. Having their Sundays free meant they could attend church as a family, have leisurely dinners, and spend real time together without the pressure of work hanging over them. The evening walks became sacred again, a time for just the two of them to reconnect and talk about their day. The children noticed the difference too. Thomas, now 15, told his father that he seemed happier. You smile more, the boy said. I like it. Your mother makes me smile, Benjamin replied. She always has. As the years continued to pass, Benjamin and Willa settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew older and more independent, which gave the couple more time for themselves. They took trips together, visiting Denver and even making it as far as San Francisco one memorable summer where Willa finally got to see the ocean she had always dreamed about. "It is even bigger than I imagined," she said, standing on the beach with the wind whipping her hair around her face. "And more beautiful." Benjamin stood beside her, holding her hand, and watched the waves crash against the shore. "I am glad we came. I am glad I could give you this." "You have given me everything I have ever wanted," Willa said. "The ocean is just the cherry on top." They grew older together with grace and love. Benjamin's hair turned fully silver, and Willa got reading glasses that she complained about constantly. Their children became adults with lives of their own. Thomas joined the business and proved to have his grandfather's head for commerce. Charlotte shocked everyone by becoming a teacher, just like her Aunt Mary. Young Samuel, quiet and thoughtful as ever, decided he wanted to be a doctor and headed off to medical school in Denver. Through it all, Benjamin and Willa remained each other's anchor. They had built something rare and precious, a marriage based on mutual respect, deep friendship, and abiding love. They still held hands on their evening walks. They still talked late into the night about everything and nothing. They still made each other laugh. In the spring of 1910, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party that the whole town attended. Benjamin stood up to make a speech, with Willa beside him looking beautiful in a new dress, and tried to find words adequate to express what he felt. 25 years ago, he began, I was a drifter with no home and no purpose. I stopped in Delta planning to buy supplies and move on, the way I had been moving on my entire adult life. But then I heard about a young woman who was dying of fever, and something made me step forward and offer to help. I did not know then that I was stepping into my future. I did not know that the sick girl I sat beside for 10 days would become the love of my life, my partner, my best friend, and the mother of my children. I did not know that Delta would become my home and all of you would become my family. But here we are, 25 years later, and I cannot imagine my life having gone any other way. He turned to Willa, taking her hands in his. You saved me, Willa Everett. You gave me a reason to stop running and a reason to build something lasting. You gave me children who make me proud every single day. You gave me a love that has sustained me through everything life has thrown at us. I hope I have given you even a fraction of what you have given me, because you deserve the world. There was not a dry eye in the room, including Willa's. She stood on her toes to kiss him, and everyone cheered. You have given me everything, she said when they pulled apart. Everything and more. I love you, Benjamin Everett. Here is to 25 more years. At least, Benjamin said, and he meant it. They got those 25 years, and then some. Benjamin and Willa Everett lived long, happy lives surrounded by children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. The store continued to prosper under Thomas's management, becoming a landmark in Delta, and a testament to the partnership his parents had built. Benjamin never forgot those 10 days in the summer of 1885, when he had stayed awake beside a dying woman, refusing to let death claim her. Those days had changed the entire course of his life, had led him to everything good and beautiful he had ever known. Sometimes, late at night when he could not sleep, he would lie beside his wife and listen to her breathing, and he would thank God that he had stopped in Delta that day, that he had heard Thomas Zimmerman's plea and decided to help, that he had fought for Willa's life and won, and Willa never forgot waking from her fever to find a stranger beside her bed, a man who had sacrificed his own rest and comfort to save her life. She never forgot the sound of his voice telling her she was going to be all right, the feel of his hand holding hers through the darkness. That stranger had become her husband, her love, her everything. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances through sickness and desperation, and the simple human need to help someone in pain. And from that difficult beginning, they had built a life filled with joy and love and purpose. On a warm summer evening in 1935, 50 years after they first met, Benjamin and Willa sat on the porch of their house in Delta, Colorado. They were old now, both in their 80s, but they still held hands like young lovers. Their children and grandchildren had thrown them a party for their 50th anniversary, and the house had been full of laughter and love all day. Now it was just the two of them, watching the sun set over the mountains the way they had done thousands of times before. 50 years, Willa said softly. Can you believe it? Best 50 years of my life, Benjamin said. His voice was rougher now with age, but the love in it was unchanged. You remember that first night when my fever broke, you asked me why I was worth saving. I never asked you that. Not out loud, but I saw it in your eyes. You were wondering why you cared so much about a stranger. Benjamin turned to look at her, this woman who had been his whole world for half a century. I stopped wondering that a long time ago. You were worth saving because you are extraordinary. Because the world is better with you in it, because I needed you even before I knew you existed. Willa smiled, the same smile that had captivated him 50 years ago. I needed you too. We were meant to find each other, Benjamin. I have always believed that. So have I, Benjamin said. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. So have I. They sat together as the stars came out. Two old people who had loved each other well and built a life that would echo through generations. The fever had burned for a week, and the cowboy had stayed awake until it finally broke. And from that simple act of compassion and endurance had grown something beautiful and lasting, a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the Wild West, proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Their children found them there hours later, still sitting on the porch holding hands, both of them having passed peacefully in their sleep. It was, everyone agreed, exactly the kind of ending their love story deserved together until the very last moment. The way they had been from that summer night in 1885, when Benjamin Everett first took Willa Zimmerman's hand and promised her she was not alone. The town of Delta mourned them deeply, and their funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives they had touched over the years. Thomas Everett, now a grandfather himself, stood at the pulpit and told the story of how his parents had met, how his mother had been dying, and his father, a stranger, had refused to let her go. My father once told me that those 10 days changed his life, Thomas said. But they changed all of our lives. If he had not stopped in Delta that day, if he had not stayed awake through my mother's fever, none of us would be here. My siblings and I would not exist. My children would not exist. The store that has supported this town for 50 years would never have been built. All of it, everything good that came from their love, started with one man's refusal to give up on a dying woman. He paused, looking out at the crowd through tears. They taught us what love looks like. Not just in the big dramatic moments, but in the small daily choices. Choosing to stay when you could leave. Choosing to care for someone even when you are exhausted. Choosing to build a life together instead of apart. That is the legacy they leave us. That is what we should all aspire to. Benjamin and Willa Everett were buried side by side in the Delta Cemetery, under a large oak tree with a view of the mountains they had loved. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates in one line. Together always. And they were. In the memories of their children and grandchildren. In the stories told about them around dinner tables and at family gatherings. In the store that still stood on Main Street, now run by the 4th generation of their family. in the love they had shown each other and everyone around them. The fever had burned for a week with no breaking, and the cowboy had stayed awake until it finally did. And from that crucible of suffering and devotion had emerged a love that lasted a lifetime, and beyond a testament to the power of choosing to care, even for a stranger, even when it cost you everything you had to give. Benjamin and Willa Everett had found each other in the hardest of circumstances and built something beautiful. Their story would be told in Delta for generations to come, a reminder that sometimes the greatest loves begin in the darkest moments, and that staying, simply staying, can change everything.